reviewers. And when we let him go, he said, well, I'll be back. Don't you worry. We'll see you in New York or Chicago, something like that.
Yes.
But see, the average American doesn't understand. This guy was trained over here, and now he leads ISIS. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I guess he read the script. Stage left, Act 4. Here I come. It's like Ayatollah Khomeini. He disappears for a while, and we treat him royally over in Paris. And then when it's time to him come in, he goes back to Iran, and the Shah wasn't stupid. The Shah knew that we put him in power in 1953 in Iran, and so the Shah just flat out mentioned to Reza, I think his name, Reza, her wife, Reza's what's his name, Gorbachev's deceased wife, but Reza, how the CIA is behind this. They're getting rid of me, so time to go bye-bye. And then, of course, I mentioned about how David Rockefeller got him into this country and all that sort of situation, because David Rockefeller was telling Jimmy Carter what to do, and that's what they do. These presidents don't know anything. They just do what they're told, whether they're George W. Bush or Barack Obama, doesn't matter. And so if you become suspicious of the leaders of the groups and the groups themselves, then what you find is things that are very, very interesting. So, for example, a month or so ago, maybe 6 weeks ago, ISIS actually had gained control of Mosul, which has a strategically important dam there called the Mosul Dam. And it sits beside the Euphrates River, not the Tigris, but the Euphrates. And they're perfectly capable of blowing up the dam. I mean, even in these old B-Westerns, you can blow up a dam. It doesn't take a lot. Believe me, ISIS has enough explosives to blow up a dam. But they sit around, right? I mean, they just sit around for a while, not blowing up for, 5 weeks. They could have blown it up, but no, they just sort of let it sit there, not blown up. And then about a week or so ago, I got on the phone and I was talking to Dr. Stan, and I was talking to John Leffler, who Dr. Stan knows as well, and I mentioned that. I said, don't you find it curious that ISIS has not blown up that Mosul Dam, which would have sent a torrent of water down through Baghdad, and of course once it runs through Baghdad, they are not too far from Baghdad themselves. They can just follow the stream of water, which would really put a serious impact on the defense of Baghdad by, the locals or any police or military that Maliki at that time could muster, right? It's simple. It's very simple. And they keep saying, we're going to take Baghdad. Well, here it is. Here's how you do it. No big deal. And so they don't do it. And then the very next day, after I talked to Dr. Stan and John Leffler, and I mentioned to them in the past how I'm convinced that my phone is bugged because I caught the federal people up bugging my phone when I was with the federal government. 2 of them. I've mentioned this before, how they would, I'd stayed on the line after they thought I'd hung up, and then I heard 2 of them talking to each other. They'd been listening to my conversation. And the very next day after I mentioned this to Dr. Stan and John Leffler, lo and behold, we decide to launch airstrikes at the ISIS people around the Mosul Dam. I mean, we let them sit there for 5 weeks, and they could have blown it up, right? But only after I mentioned why aren't they blowing it up on the phone did we decide, hey, maybe they'll blow it up and maybe we ought to have some airstrikes. And so now, if ISIS was a real terror group, you can see all the people around the leadership yelling at Baghdadi. They're killing him.
Hold that thought. Well, they've given up the dam. Dennis, well, certainly there's no question that they've driven the ISIS people away from the dam, so they no longer have the dam. They can no longer blow it up. But go right ahead.
Yeah. So if I'm like a second or third in command around Baghdadi, I'm going furious. I mean, if it's real, I'm going furious. You idiot, you leader of us. You had 5 weeks to blow up this dam, and you just sat there, and now we're getting creamed by these American fighter planes, and now we no longer have control of the dam. You blew your opportunity to wash out Baghdad, follow the flood of water, and take over Baghdad. Well, why did you do this? I mean, that's what I might be saying, if I was number 2 or 3, right? So it raises all of these questions, though. So we decided to hit the dam right after I made these comments. Why aren't they hitting the dam on the phone? And Baghdadi sat around for, he's supposed to be ruthless, on the march, killing children, stopping at nothing. I'm going to conquer everything. But, hey, let's let the dam sit there. Who really cares about Baghdad? I don't want it anyway. It doesn't make sense. And that's why I tell people when something doesn't make sense, always become suspicious and look at it as something that the power elite is doing or up to or, preventing or in control of. And so that just makes me even more suspicious that Baghdadi and the whole ISIS, I'm sure that there are, what we call grunts down there, the guys on the little pickup trucks who are actually getting blown up by our missiles. I'm sure they're very, very sincere, ruthless killers, terrorists. But they're the sort of worker bees under the leadership of Baghdadi, and I'm very suspicious about Baghdadi and, the whole leadership there as to what they're doing. Because, if you really are on the march, you really want Baghdad, and here you have this dam, which can wash away Baghdad, and you follow with your forces right behind the flood of water, and you take Baghdad, why don't you do it? It's a logical question, right? And so, but they did, right? And we start bombing them right after I make this comment on the phone. It's just very, very suspicious. Okay, so that's one of the things, too, that you would want to look for. The next thing is, if you go back even further, what you find are the power elite sort of repeats various scenarios. It's sort of like in 1912 when you had them with Teddy Roosevelt entering into the campaign. To split the vote with William Howard Taft, the president, so that Woodrow Wilson would come into power. And then, similarly, events in 1992, you want Bill Clinton, like I said, because the World Trade Organization, you got to pass that NAFTA, and so you split the vote with George H.W. Bush and Ross Perot. Now, some votes did get taken off for Clinton, but more votes got taken away from George H.W. Bush, which allows Bill Clinton to become president. And so what you have is a similar situation across national boundaries with Egypt. So, for example, we want the Muslim Brotherhood in. They come in, but they move a little too fast towards Sharia law. They don't do like we said. So we call up our puppet, Sisi, the general in charge of Egypt, and he, puts them down. The Muslim Brotherhood still is in 70-plus countries, and they're ruthless. And like I said, they do our dirty work in Yemen and Qatar, Qatar, however you pronounce it, and other places there. So the stage is set again. So who is Sisi? Well, you have to look at Sisi. If you've ever seen...
Hold that thought, Dennis. Hold that thought. We'll be back here in just a moment. Well, this is Dr. Stan, and Dennis was simply saying that the ISIS radicals under Baghdadi could certainly have blown up the Mosul Dam. They had it for 5 weeks, and basically all they had to do was follow the water, which washed away most of Baghdad. They could have taken over Baghdad, but they didn't do it. And then, of course, the United States brought in bomb planes, and we bombed the ISIS positions, and they had to pull back from the dam. Why didn't they do what was logical if they wanted to take Baghdad and the rest of Iraq? Or is this all put on? And remember, the Baghdadi would just happen to be in American custody for a number of years. Go right ahead.
Yeah, and so if you look at the similar scenario with Egypt, which is very important in all of this, and remember, it's all part of the secret Nazi plan, too, because Nasser came to power and maintained his power with 100 Nazis subcontracted by the CIA, of course. That's what they do. And so if you look at the situation in Egypt, the general there is named Sisi, S-I-S-I. It's Al-Sisi, but Al is just like, a family name. It's like David Ben-Gurion, Ben-Hur, the house of Hur, that sort of stuff. They put A-L. But his name's Sisi, S-I-S-I. What you find is that he's very, very ruthless, but he doesn't present himself as ruthless. He's very, very strong. He's extremely strong, an athlete, but he doesn't seem to be. He doesn't present himself as that. But if you've heard his voice, he talks like this. He talks very, very softly and so forth. Now, who does all that remind you? Who does that remind you of? Teddy Roosevelt, right? Talk softly, but carry a big stick. Teddy was something of an athlete, bully, and, when he was little, he was in ill health, but he struggled and worked, and then became, a rugged sort of individual leading the charge up San Juan Hill. So anyway, it's Teddy Roosevelt repeated in Egypt. It's like the same scenario in Egypt as Teddy Roosevelt. And, why is that? Well, look at what they're doing. Sisi, of course, is a military-style dictatorship of socialism. I mean, that's, in fact, I keep emphasizing Americans see the world from an American perspective, but Americans don't appreciate that the majority of the world is socialist. There's about, 30% or so communist, if you take China and Russia, but they're moving, towards socialism, actually. And then America, we're actually a minority. A purely capitalist country. There's only about 15% of the world is purely capitalist. And so we're actually in the minority. So Sisi is implementing a sort of military-run, feudalistic socialist economy and so forth and so on. And you say, well, what's that got to do with Teddy? Well, that's what Teddy did. You said, what? You have to remember. The cartoon in 1911 that I keep mentioning, I put in my books, by Robert Miner in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, has a picture of Karl Marx on Wall Street. And the caption says, delighted, because the people around him are greeting him, and they're saying to Karl Marx, we're delighted to meet you. And the people are not only John D. Rockefeller, J.P. Morgan, but Teddy's there. Teddy's there, and is with his great big smile and all is typically known for. And they're delighted to meet him. And under Marx's arm is a book, and it's not called the Communist Manifesto. It's called Socialism. So Teddy's implementing that. And I remember telling you last week or in the recent past how in my book that's titled Road to Socialism and the New World Order, that's been offered by Radio Liberty. At the very first of it, I put a quote by Hadley, Hadley, and it's the son of the person, same name, Hadley, Morris Hadley and Arthur Twining Hadley, who was a member of Skull and Bones and president of Yale University. And the son is saying, my father told me, the president of Yale and Skull and Bones member, my father told me that if people knew what he, the president of Yale, and Teddy Roosevelt were really up to, they both, Teddy and the president of Yale, would lose their job. Because that's what Teddy was really up to. He was secretly, going along with apparently what they were doing, and everybody thought he was a trust buster, but he really wasn't. He just sort of dispersed them. You say, well, look, he broke up Standard Oil. Yeah? Oh, yeah, okay. Standard Oil of New Jersey, Standard Oil of Ohio, Standard Oil.
Well, I think it's important that people understand that America is moving towards a socialist country. We're moving away from capitalism, away from freedom, and away from private corporations, into a corporate socialist society where every aspect of life, whether it be health, education, or welfare, is taken care of. Today we have over 100 million people on welfare in the United States today, and suddenly 153 are receiving some sort of a government check. And of course, it can't go on forever because we're doing it with borrowed money. They want to destroy America, not from without, but from within. We'll be back in a moment. Dennis, you go right